Hello everyone and welcome to episode 5 of Learning Sim Racing. This episode is going to be all about battling on track and trying to attack and defend your position. Now this video is going to be split up into two different sections. The first section is going to be on single class racing, whereas all the cars on track are of one class and have a comparable performance to each other. The second part of the video is going to be focusing more on the rules for multi-class racing. It's important to remember that everything stated for single-class racing will apply in multi-class racing when you are driving around the cars of the same class as yourself. But there are more rules that you need to remember whenever you are around cars of classes that are either faster or slower than yourself. Now, a quick note before we get into the full video itself. I do know on the past 4 videos there has been a bit of an odd audio issue with the voiceover being panned to the left side. Unfortunately, I do not have the ability to fix that without doing some very weird things that would cause the panning of the background noise to be off as well. So those videos are going to be left the way they are. However, I will be correcting the issue here in the future from this video moving forward. So hopefully that isn't something that you have to worry about from this point on. But with that quick side note out of the way, let's get into the video proper. Now, battling on track for single class racing is much more straightforward than for multi-class racing. All the cars are of comparable performance, and there are going to be no large gaps between what any given car is able to do. So this means it's going to be racing in the way that you're used to seeing and that you generally think of. There are a few points that need to be taken into account when talking about this, and that would be things such as attacking, defending, line priority, dives, and dive bombs. So going through that list, attacking is whenever you try to take the position away from the car in front of you to move up the leaderboard. Now, whenever this is happening, it does fall to the car behind to make the pass cleanly, as it does with any other type of racing. What this means is that the car that's behind cannot hit the car that's ahead to try and move them out of the way, nor can they push them off track to try and gain the position. Doing so can result in you getting a punishment from whichever governing body is sitting over the race series. Now, with defending, it's somewhat similar, but when you are defending, you are the car ahead, and you are trying to prevent a car from behind from getting ahead of you on track, causing you to drop down the leaderboard. Now, much like an attacking car must do, the defending car needs to give the respect to the driver attacking them to not ruin their race as well. What this means is that if the car behind is able to get alongside them, they cannot hit the attacking car off track, nor can they try and force them off track to get them to not gain that position. It does go both ways, and depending on the situation that it happens in, there can be a punishment that falls to the defending car if they are defending overly aggressively. Another very important thing to note when you're defending is the general rules of defending that do go into it. In general, you will note that there is a rule of 1 move per defense. What this means is you don't go down the straight, weaving all over the track to try and keep a car from getting past you. If they are coming up on you, you don't start swerving in their way to try and block them off suddenly. Another very important thing to keep in mind is you do not make any late defensive moves into a braking zone. If you are on the outside of the track on the racing line going into a braking zone and begin to brake, you then cannot move over to try and cut in front of a car that may be attacking you to try and block them off. 9 times out of 10, this is going to lead to a collision between the 2 cars involved, and it will be punishable to the defending car for making a very late, very dangerous move. Now, a term that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode is line priority. The question is, what is line priority? Line priority dictates which car will naturally get the racing line when two cars are battling into a corner. Now, the way this is figured out is based off of whether or not they are side by side and whether or not a car is on the inside or the outside. If the cars are at least halfway alongside each other, then line priority goes to the car on the inside. That means they get priority of the racing line come mid-corner for the apex. Now, if something happens and contact is made and someone is faulted for it, generally the car without line priority is going to be the car and driver that is faulted for the contact. However, there are exceptions. Going back to the note on defending, if you take the apex and try and take the full racing line when the car is still alongside you and you push them out, then it will be faulted for you. The same thing with attacking. It doesn't matter if you're taking a position or defending it, you get line priority to get the good line through the apex of the corner. However, you still have to leave some room for the car on corner exit and not just push them off the track. Now again, for this to take effect, both cars must be at least halfway alongside each other before they reach corner entry. Now, what is a dive? A move that you'll see a lot of drivers use, especially into hard braking zones, to try and get alongside enough to make line priority count, is going to be what's known as a dive. Now, a dive is when you try and brake later than the car ahead of you to get to their inside or their outside going into a corner, depending on whether they take the regular racing line or they go defensive to the inside. Now, properly making a dive can be a very difficult thing to do, especially if the driver ahead is good with their braking markers, because you need to brake later than them to carry more speed into the corner, but you still need to be able to get your car up alongside of them before you actually start turning in. It is a risky move to try and make for a new sim racer, and it leads to more accidents than it does rewards for that very reason. A lot of times you will see drivers try and dive to the inside and wind up coming into contact and just punting straight into the car that they're attacking. You may also see a new driver try and make a dive to the outside because the defending car has gone defensive to the inside of the racing line, and they wind up going off track or running way too wide in the corner, and they can't get the move done. Now, I talked about going to the inside and making contact with the car, and this is what is known as a dive bomb. It is the same technique as a dive. However, the difference comes because a dive bomb occurs whenever the attacking driver is not alongside by the time the lead car is turning in. What this means is the lead car is turning in, going for apex of the corner, and you are going into that corner on their inside while the room is decreasing at a much faster rate of speed, and generally will cause contact unless you get lucky and the driver ahead is very vigilant and gets out of the way of your car. However, if contact comes because of a dive bomb, it will mean that the attacking car will be penalized for it if a penalty is handed out. It is a very dangerous maneuver to try and pull off because you are at much higher risk of contact being made due to the fact that the lead car is already turning in to head towards corner apex. Now, those are the general rules of single-class racing. However, multi-class racing has a few more rules that you need to make sure you watch out for when you're doing it. For this, we'll be talking about the slower classes, and we will be talking about the faster classes. It is important to note there are series that actually run 3 or more classes of cars within them at the same time, with the cars having varying levels of speed. If you fall into one of the middle classes and you have both slower classes and faster classes of cars around you, you need to keep all of these rules in mind whenever you are on track to try and prevent an accident from happening. Now, starting off with the slower classes, the most important thing for you to remember as a slower class driver is you need to be predictable out on track. It is not up to you to let the faster class of car get by. They have to be the ones to make the moves, but the only way for them to safely get by a slower class of car is for them to be able to predict what the slower class of car is going to do. If you go into a corner on the racing line and a faster class of car is behind you but not trying to make a pass, hold your line through the corner. Don't make any weird moves when you are taking the turn. If you start making weird moves or holding weird lines through the corner, it becomes much more difficult for a faster class of driver to tell when they are able to make a pass. This also means you shouldn't suddenly be weaving around the track whenever you are on a straight. Going on corner exit, you will oftentimes see that a slower or a faster class of car will stick to the opposite side of the track as the slower class of car to try and make a pass. However, if you suddenly begin to weave across to that side of the track, it becomes much more difficult for a faster class of driver to successfully get that pass off without contact being made. And if they try and dodge your car, it could result in them losing control of their own and causing a wreck within the field behind you. Another very important thing you need to remember is to watch the traffic behind you. Whether that's you're watching in the mirrors, whether that's you're watching your relative to see when a faster class of car is coming, you need to be aware of what the traffic behind you is doing. Because a lot of times you will see faster classes of cars make moves into corners on the slower classes if they can get up to them on the straights fast enough, and you need to be aware of when it looks like a faster class of car is going to be making that move on you. Learning to read the traffic behind you and learning to predict what the faster class of cars is going to do at any point is going to mean that you are able to drive much more safely and much more quickly out on track and be less of a hassle for everyone else to deal with. And you'll find that the racing becomes much more enjoyable after you get used to it. Now, I mentioned what the faster classes of cars may be doing a lot when talking about the slower classes and how the slower classes may affect the faster classes, but let's talk about the faster classes of cars part in all of this. Now, as I said, it is not the job of the slower class drivers to just let the faster class of cars through. The slower class is still racing, so they have all right to take the line if they get to the corner. What this means is the faster class of car is responsible for making a pass just like you are if you're trying to pass a car of the same class. The faster class of cars also need to learn to be patient. Yes, you are out there on a faster car, you have more speed around the track, odds are you can carry more corner speed through a lot of the corners. However, you need to pick your corners to pass. You don't want to be throwing it up the inside and diving every last slower class of car you see on every single corner. You are going to slow down your race, you are going to slow down the race of the slower class of cars, and inevitably you eventually are going to cause an incident that could ruin not only your race, but also the race of the slower classes of cars. Another important thing that you have to remember is leave room to the slower classes of cars until you are passing them. What does this mean? When you're going into a corner, if you aren't making a pass on them in the corner, don't sit there a few feet off of their rear bumper. Again, odds are, in a faster class, you can carry more corner entrance, apex, and exit speed on a lot of corners. If you sit right on their bumper, that means you're having to slow yourself down to their pace. And so any other cars in your class that are behind you could possibly get a run onto you going into or exiting the corners because you're relegated to the pace of the slower class. What you want to do is you want to lift off, you want to stay a little bit behind the slower classes. That way you can utilize your better corner exit speed to try and make a pass on them in the straights. You'll be able to carry more speed on corner entry and on corner exit, and so your pace will stay the same as it normally would, maybe a little reduced. But in general, more space is going to equal more speed whenever you are on track behind slower classes of cars. Now, probably the biggest issue that I have ever seen and I have ever experienced with multi-class racing has to be the following. It's something I've experienced as a slower class driver, and it is something that I will admit I have done before as the faster class of driver. And that is that you must commit. Do not look to the inside of a slower class driver if you are not planning on trying to pass them in the corner. Because a good slower class driver will see you coming up, will see you go, look to the inside, and so they will hold a wide line through the corner to try and let you through because they're expecting you to try and get past them in the corner. If you don't do that, what that means is you are now stuck right behind the slower class of car going their pace when they are going slow through the corner. You are going to ruin their lap, you are going to ruin your own lap, and you could wind up causing an accident because you have every part of the road blocked off with very slow-moving traffic because everyone expected you to do something you were not doing. If you are non-committal on track, faster classes of cars in a multi-class series are not going to suit you well. Yes, everyone wants to make sure that they can get the move done cleanly without blasting someone off the track if they're in a slower class. However, it is going to irritate everyone on track if you look to the inside, cause the slower class to run wide to let you by, and then you sit behind them for the entirety of the corner. And everyone is just going to be yelling for you to get off the track. Now, the final point that I really want to make with this to the faster class of drivers is going to be, remember, everyone has their own race. You can see up ahead of you if there's a battle going on between slower classes of cars. What you need to remember is while that battle is going on, they may not move as predictably as they would if they were just running laps. What this means is you may need to be more patient and you need to be more vigilant in watching their moves and watching what they are doing. You need to make sure that you find an opportunity where it is safe to get around them. That way you don't have something happen such as one of them jumping to the inside suddenly to try and make a dive on the car in front of them while you're coming up to pass them in the corner. You also want to be careful that they don't jump out to try and make a pass on a straight as you are coming up. Again, the slower class of drivers should be paying attention to the traffic behind them, and therefore they should see that you are coming up and make a note that they need to let you by at some point and watch for what you're doing. However, once they get into a battle, they may wind up forgetting that they have other classes of cars in there because they get so wrapped up in the moment trying to get past the car ahead. What this means is you need to make sure you're watching, and you need to pick up the slack where they may leave it. That way you can help to avoid having a massive wreck on the track. So summarizing everything that we've talked about in this video. Again, this one was all about battling on track in both single and multi-class racing. For single class racing, it is going to be racing as general. You need to remember when attacking, you're trying to take the position. It is on you to make the pass cleanly, and you cannot force the car off track that's ahead of you or hit them to try and knock them off. Same thing with defending on not hitting or moving them and showing them that respect, but instead you are trying to keep a driver behind you from getting ahead of you. A lot of times, whenever a penalty is handed out on contact, it's going to come down to line priority. Line priority dictates who gets priority of taking the racing line through the corner. It is not a free pass to push the other driver off track if you have it, and so if you do that, then you could be penalized for contact even if you have line priority. And in order for line priority to become a thing, you must have your car at least halfway alongside the car ahead before corner entry. A dive is a technique used to do this, and it's a very difficult and dangerous technique if you don't know how to do it. That involves you braking later than the car ahead to try and get alongside them before they go for turning into the corner. A dive bomb is the same as a dive, however, it occurs after the car ahead has already started turning into the corner, and again is a very dangerous move even for an experienced driver. And should contact come and a penalty be handed out, it will always be at the fault of the attacking car. Whenever you get into multi-class racing, you need to remember everything for single-class racing applies whenever you're racing cars of your same class. But if you're a slower class driver, you need to hold your line through the corners and be predictable while out on track, and also watch the traffic behind you. That way you know when you have faster classes of cars coming up. If you're in a faster class of car, you are responsible for making the pass as if you were trying to overtake someone in the same class as you. You need to be patient and pick when you're going to pass, and don't dive bomb every other corner. You're going to slow yourself down, you're going to slow the other cars down, and you are going to inevitably cause an accident. You need to leave room for the slower classes until you're passing them, because if you're right on their bumper, you have to go their pace. So, the more space you have, the more speed that you can have. And if you look to the inside to pass on a corner, you need to commit to making the move, because if a slower class of driver sees you look to the inside and expects that to happen, you are going to slow everyone down if you do not try and make the pass. And finally, you have to remember everyone out there has their own race, and while they're in the middle of a battle, the slower classes of drivers may not realize that you're coming up or how quickly you're coming up on them, so they may not move as predictably as normal. So you need to be vigilant about what they're doing at all times. That way you can safely make the pass on them to try and get ahead and let them resume their race. Moving on, after this episode, we are going to start looking at more specialized videos looking at specific classes of racing. The first section that we are going to be looking at is going to be either low-class racing or sports car. I'm not sure which one I'm going to go with yet, as either could be a good segue into it. But for these sections, once we start getting into the higher classes of racing, I will start bringing on guests to help me do these episodes, people that may have a bit more experience and knowledge with these kinds of racing that they can add to the videos to help you guys out. Obviously, I'm only one person. I do love sim racing. It is something that I have done for a bit now. However, I don't know everything about every class of racing. So it'll be awesome to get other people in on the series and see what they have to say about their specific style of racing that they prefer. Now, odds are this is going to be the longest episode of Learning Sim Racing to date, but I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, then again, feel free to leave a like. This will be in a playlist. I will leave a link to the full playlist in the description of the video. That way you can find it if you want to watch all these from start to finish. But with that, guys, I have been Nightlock, and I will see you in the next one.
What is reflected in my eyes? Now the moonlight in a starless midnight. The showers on the people passing by. One is so small and the world's so wide.